Hello, everybody, friends, well-wishers, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Prasad Kumar. Many people call me PM as well. And I speak with you as a member of the Academic Council of the Institute and as a family business advisor this evening. I'm very happy to say we have about 1,060 registrations this evening, with participation from 11 countries, which include USA, Canada, Bangladesh, Guinea, Nepal, Philippines, Singapore, Tanzania, UK, France, and India, including the Havelock Islands in the Andamans. A warm greetings to each of you and welcome to this symposium. This is the first of a series of 4 symposiums at one go this time and with more to come. At this juncture, we also hope and pray that you and your near and dear are safe and well in these difficult times. Parampara Family Business Institute is a not-for-profit social initiative, and our mission is to reach out to as many family businesses as possible through awareness, education, and research in this complex area of family business. Parampara in India means legacy. It means heritage, tradition. And it seems very fitting that this theme for this evening follows that thought. The wisdom of 100 years of family enterprises. That's the topic. Dr. Jaffe is our guest speaker. He is the author of the scintillating book, strongly recommended, called Borrowed from Your Grandchildren. Mr. Peter Leach and I will be in conversation with him this evening, largely based on this book. Both Dennis and Peter are international grandmasters of family business, authors, teachers, researchers, and practitioners. They have advised scores of family business across the globe, and it's a privilege to have them with us to share their thoughts, wisdom, and take us to another level of thinking on this subject. Before we comment on this topic, I have the pleasure to welcome Mr. G.M. Rao. He is the leading first-generation entrepreneur, an institution builder, an ardent philanthropist, and group chairman of the multi-business conglomerate, the GMR Group. It's my privilege and pleasure to present to you Mr. G.M. Rao.
Namaste. Thank you, PM. Thank you, PM and Dennis Liffey and Peter Leach. Hello, everyone. I welcome you to our learning journey on family businesses. Family businesses are the backbone of the economies world over. Over 70% of the world's economy is contributed by the family businesses. A third of the Fortune 500 companies are family-owned. And 60% of all publicly traded companies remain under family influence. Hence, in real sense, these family businesses are the assets of the respective countries, which also raises serious need to ensure they perpetuate through generations. There is a saying, such leaves to such leaves in 3 generations, meaning that the older generation started with nothing, worked hard, created wealth, and by the time their great-grandchildren are in charge, their family is back where they started with nothing. It is worrisome to note that hardly 30% of the family businesses in India survives from first to second, 13% of second to third, and a mere 4% survives beyond the third generation. The major reasons are family disputes and the failure of the business leader in effectively balancing his multi-dimensional role, family, business, and ownership, which need to be delicately managed by the family business leader. In essence, the family businesses need a strong family governance in place, which can be achieved by creating well thought out and planned family constitution. Family constitution is the vehicle of family governance, which provides the structured way to live the family governance. Friends, we all know that we are living in a very volatile, uncertain, and complex world, majorly due to rapid technological advancements and disruptive innovations. To add to it, the current global pandemic has brought unprecedented changes in the lives and economy all over the world. The way of life and the way of work are being redefined. We should understand that these types of global uncertainties and challenges will be part of our lives in future as well. To withstand such challenges now and in future, to run the family business successfully, it becomes very important for families to stay together with complete alignment. The only tool to ensure that is effective family governance. It is very critical to understand that generally family members will tend to take things for granted, which is very dangerous. A strong, unflinching commitment to family vision and values are required. And once the family constitution in place, it should be like the Bible for all the family members, which needs to be strictly adhered to. Friends, my experience, I can say that it is always better to initiate the family governance journey during the lifetime of the founder. I have been fortunate enough to travel the journey of family constitution in my lifetime. We are still trying to live the family governance as it is a continuous journey. It is important to understand that if the founder develops skills based on the demand of the role, then he will be the lifeline. Otherwise, he will become the bottleneck. I want to repeat. If the founder develops skills based on the demand of the role, then he will be the lifeline. Otherwise, he will become the bottleneck. I thought of sharing our experiences with the world through this platform of Parampara Family Business Institute. It is not-for-profit initiative of GMR Group Foundation and aspires to serve as an education and research platform on family governance. I hope Parampara will help many small and medium family businesses to understand nuances of family governance. Through a series of virtual symposium, Parampara Family Business Institute will offer you top quality wisdom through world-renowned experts. I'm sure you will be benefit from the learning sessions. Thank you. Thank you very much, Farah.
Thank you, DMR Ji. Thank you very much for that keynote, a very inspiring keynote, bang on, as they say. So it's time for me now to pass the baton to Mr. Peter Leach. And Peter, please take us forward during this session.
Thank you, PM, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I have a great pleasure in introducing Dennis Jaffe, who is going to share a summary very quickly of his latest book, and then we're going to enter a discussion around it, and towards the end of the hour, we're going to invite audience participation on the Q&A, which we'll do live with your questions. So without any fuss, let me please welcome Dennis.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here and to be part of this wonderful gathering. So I've been on a journey for the past 7 years, traveling around the world, interviewing families that have been in business together and successful as both a business and a family for more than 3 generations. And what I'm going to do is share some of the commonalities and open it up to discussion. So I was like a lot of us, was inspired by a book called Built to Last by Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. And it talked about successful companies that were successful over long term. And what was interesting to me, as I found reading a lot of business literature, he was writing about businesses and about how they had a strong culture and a clear sense of identity, but he didn't mention the owners. And the owners of many of these businesses were families. That didn't come up in the book. And yet, in my experience and what we're focused on, that families were at the core. Where did these cultures come from? They came from the founding families. So I began my study to kind of look at what are the commonalities, what are the stories. I'm a story collector by temperament, and so my book is rather thick, but it's not thick because it's full of theory. It's thick because it's got stories. And what I wanted to know is to talk to these successful families that had stayed together over 3 generations and had not just one business, but sometimes several legacy businesses, many things that they did together, and to say, how did you do it? How did you get started? Where did this wonderful culture come from? And that's what I've written about. So first of all, a lot of business research is about the business, and this thing about the business not lasting more than a generation or two. That's true of businesses. Businesses don't last forever. They're not immortal. But families can last much longer. And I studied families, and I studied when you look at families rather than businesses, what you see is rise and fall and different activities and changes and new people coming on. It's a very, very different story than studying a business. There are 2 things about family businesses that I learned that really make family businesses fundamentally different than public corporations. And there are 2 factors that came up in this research. One is the owners have a personal relationship with each other. It's not always the best relationship, so there are challenges, but they have a personal relationship, and this isn't about things that they care about, things that they're concerned about, and often it's about things beyond just the financial. So family businesses have a personal relationship, and that is very consequential. The second thing is, and this is in the title of my book, Borrowed from Your Grandchildren, and it's about what is the business for? They have business, they're successful. It's not for, they don't see it as fun for right now. They see it as something that they're investing in the future. So I studied families, and one of the things that I saw in these businesses is that the family, when it works, and when they're not fractured, and when they're not fighting, and when they're not at odds with each other, when the family is aligned and working together, they have a powerful advantage in business and enterprise, and in general. They have great things that they can do. And what I found myself writing about is how the familyness, the family entity of many generations made for not just a powerful business, but many activities. So first of all, let's say what's family? Family is something as well. Of course, everybody knows what family is. And I started asking them, and they said to me, wait a minute. What do you mean by family? And I said, for me, family, they would say, is me and my kids and my spouse and maybe my parents. It's a household unit. But these were not families in that sense. These were, by the 3rd generation, they had many households, sometimes hundreds. And the challenge was this was a large community. And so when we say families over 3 generations, we're really talking about tribes and tribal governance and communities. And most communities, culturally in the past, they would share a location. They'd all be, living near each other, and that's a tradition, of course, in India. But families over generations disperse, and so how do they keep it together? So first insight I had about these families is that they made a decision. Not the founder often didn't do that. The founder was building a business, and that was his main concern. The next generation saw the family growing. They saw things, and they made a decision. It was about, what are we going to do? We have all this wealth. We have all this these resources coming in. What is it for? What is our purpose? What can we do with it? And what they decided is they wanted to invest in building a great family. They didn't build the family to make more money. What they did is they built a great family because they had wealth, and they said, what do we want to do with it? What's meaningful to us? And that's the essence of what these families are all about. Now, one of the things about this decision is it makes for a major cultural shift. All of these families had founders, and because I was looking at past the third generation, none of the founders were alive. So I never interviewed a business founder, but boy, did I hear stories about them and their influence and how much they had done. But the families talked about a shift, and the one thing, founders do many things that are wonderful, but one thing that they're not so good at is creating a shared legacy and a community in their next generation. It's just not something that they've learned. They've been individualists. They've been working for themselves. So the challenge that they have is how to create a community where they collaborate. There may be a leader, there may be a business leader, but it's very important, these families said, that the business leader is not the family leader. And they have many leaders. They sometimes have a philanthropic leader. They sometimes have somebody who brings the family together and deals with conflict. So families have to create a structure for many people, not a structure for one person. And this is a culture shift. The family has to build an active organization. Now, this is where we get into what we want, the meat of what we want to discuss, and that is that the families of these families, independently of the business, they had to do. They wanted a lot of things to do. They wanted a great family. They wanted to build the next generation. They wanted to have social commitment. They wanted to do wonderful things together. They had many businesses, and so these kinds of family activities are not business activities, and they're not covered in business governance. So these families found that they had to create a parallel structure, which is a family structure alongside their business structure, and the family had to work together with it. The other thing about these families, and now we're dealing with families over 100 or more years, is that they were always evolving. And this is where the idea of resiliency comes up, that they were always rethinking themselves, and they were tremendously innovative. So one of the reasons why family businesses don't last 3 generations is because you can't do the same thing for 3 generations and keep producing more and more income. New things come up. Look at the current environment in the world. Every business is challenged. And what that means is they had to innovate. And let me talk about culture of innovation, that every family had a cultural way that the family innovated. And it involves that there were 3 main groups in a family. And this is something we can talk about in the discussion. So there were the elders, and the elders have the formal control, but the elders are not going to live forever. And one of the roles of the elder is not to run everything, but to develop the foundation and the framework for the next generation. And this may not be something that they're particularly good at. So the elders have values, they have a commitment, they built something wonderful, but that's the legacy. The second group is the elders bring in non-family members, advisors, consultants like us, professionals who build a great business. And these people are business oriented. They know the law. They're very disciplined. They create a great business. But what these families said is that didn't build innovation, that the advisors were wonderful at creating growth in what they had, and the elders had a wonderful sense of what they had done in the past. But there's a third group, and this group doesn't exist in a non-family business. This is a resource in the family that is only in a family business, and that is the next generation. The next generation are the product of the family. That's what one of the families said. They are the product, and they are educated, and they're taught values, and they're invited to help the family. And when I asked the family, where does innovation come from in the family? Most of the family said, well, it started with a group of next generation, third generation, fourth generation. It started with discussions at family meetings in the summer. It started when so-and-so went to a family business conference in Singapore and came back and had all these ideas. So innovation comes from below, and these people are not formal leaders. They're people that they're smart, they're young, they're always thinking and looking ahead. They have lots of energy, but they have to be listened to. And in these families, there's what we call the generative alliance of elders, advisors, and the next generation. And they know each other, they work together. The next generation may not be on the board, they may not be working in the business, but they are the future. And that is essential. There's two more things I want to mention very briefly, and then we're going to get into discussion. The other thing that these families do is that they're not a normal family. They have special challenges. How many regular people don't have to understand trusts, and they don't have to understand global business, and they don't have to understand foundation and philanthropy. And so the complexity of these families is incredible. And so these families don't just say, every parent just raise your kids. That's part of raising children, as you raise your own children. But these families say, well, we have some things in common, and we want to create an educational, and we want to create resources so that our young people are productive, and we want to support them and mentor them, and we want to educate them, and we want to challenge them. And so they create an educational structure, and along with that structure becomes an innovation kind of a seminar and engagement, where the young people are not just educated, because they're not educated quietly. As they get educated, they begin to say, well, what about this? And why do we do that? And hey, Uncle Joe or Dad, why don't we try this? And so they start coming up with ideas. So the education of the next generation and the preparation leads to proposals and ideas. And these families have to entertain these proposals. Final thing, and where I want to open up our discussion, is that these families are not about business. They care about business, they care about profitability, and they're not allergic to it. But when you talk to the next generation, really, they've grown up wealthy. They've gone to great schools. It's been part of their lives. And they say, well, we're wealthy. They begin to feel sensitive. What are we doing? They're looking around at the world of COVID and the world of global warming and the worlds of sustainability and people, poverty and inequality. And they're saying, well, we have a privilege, and that's an awkward thing to deal with. It's psychologically torturous for some people to kind of deal with being privileged and looking at the world. And they begin to say, what can we do as a family with our resources so that we are contributing, because we want something for our grandchildren. And if there's no world for them, then why do we build all this business? And so there's a sense of social mission. And when I talk to these families, the people in the families, and particularly the young people, some of them go into the business, some of them go into private capital and investment and social investment, and others go into social ventures, things that they do to make a difference in the world, and they call on their family to do that. That's what the foundation, GMR Foundation, is doing. That's what other families are doing, and they use the alignment and the connection of the family to build something great that isn't necessarily one more business. It's a social mission. So as you can see, this is a very wonderful journey, and it's continuing. And we interviewed 100 families, but now our goal is to get up to 200 and continue to learn from these families. And we're searching out more and more global families and more diverse stories. So let's maybe open it up and talk with our other my colleagues here. and let's explore some of these elements.
Thank you, Dennis. Absolutely. I have to say your book is brilliant, and the idea that you've spoken to 100 families around the world and they've really shared their most personal and private issues and reasons that they've been successful is a blessing. I wish I'd been a fly on the wall, to be honest. Your concept of borrowed from your grandchildren, it's almost biblical. And one of the things that you talk about in your book is that there's only 1% of families that you define as those that become generative. And you use this word and this concept of generative families being one of the core distinctions between families that make it through to the fourth generation, and bearing in mind sort of the majority of the cases you looked at were in G4 and beyond. But what is the secret sauce that generates this concept of generative families? What is it? How do you become a generative family? How would you define that? And if you were talking to a family and they said, well, we'd like to become a generative family, what do we have to do? How would you answer that, Dennis?
Well, you asked three questions, but let me go quickly. One is the 1% is the one thing that I didn't contribute in the interview. This is the general, kind of things that people say. And basically, when you're looking at a third generation family, 1%, 0.1%, 0.11%, there aren't many of them. That's the thing. And so the question is, what do they do? And what better way to find out than by asking them? But the idea of generativity hits another myth. And one of the myths that's implicit when we say shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves is the idea that somehow the founder created a pot of gold and he put it in a big pot and gave it to the next generation, and then everybody takes their little pieces out of it and lives well, and then the pot gets lower and lower and lower. But these families didn't do that. They created value. They talked about how the second generation, the third generation, there were people in the family that came in and created financial value. But the other thing is about generativity is that also the values that were important to them were non-financial. So the idea of generative means wealth creating, and the idea that these families are not just living off the wealth of the earlier generation, they are getting together and building financial and non-financial wealth over generations. So they're creating value. They're not necessarily value around getting richer and richer, because as there may be 200 family members, the amount of wealth that they'd have to create to make everybody as wealthy as the founder is unthinkable. But they create a comfortable, aligned self, and the key to generativity is they ask themselves, what is our wealth for, and what is it that's important and special and meaningful and inspiring and helpful that we can do with this wealth? And that is the essence of generativity. PM, maybe you can say something about from your experience about some of this.
So, Peter, you're on mute. Peter? Yeah.
Go ahead, PM.
So I think just picking up threads on generativity, I think in this book you mentioned three factors, if I've got it right. One, generative families do three things right. One, they have a successful business, not necessarily a business, but a portfolio of businesses.
Right.
One. Two, they're adaptable and innovative. And you talked of the next gen being the driver of innovation. And third, very importantly, that struck me, they have a shared identity, a culture. Mm-hmm. Which leads me to a question. You in your book, very succinctly, you talk about the concept of familiness. And it's almost central to your research finding. And if I put it in context, in the East, we believe that the family holds the business together. We also believe that in the West, the business holds the family together. So if I put all of this together, how do I make sense? Who will gain most from this book and your thinking?
Well, looking at that, that statement, about familyness, the family business is two cultures: a family culture of personal relationships and hopefully caring and support, and a business culture of financial discipline and creativity and adaptability. And a family business is not this. These two cultures have to blend together. And what families find over the second, third generation is that the two cultures, they each need a different kind of stewardship. And so I came to the idea that there are two pillars. There's a business organization and business governance, and we're not going into that, but that's certainly important. And but the family also has non-financial activities, and these are complicated. And you ask a family, what do you think the budget is for development of next generation, for family meetings, for family governance, and the actual amounts that these families spend on that. Just having a family meeting for 200 people is a huge expense. So they're saying we're spending our money to create a great family. And these families have family leadership and family governance and family activities. And the culture of the family is not exactly the same as the culture of the business. The culture of the business is about business and about, values and things like that. It has some elements in common, but the family culture, and so these families talk about, they have a business culture and a family culture, and there are some, maybe many common values, but they're expressed in different ways. And in order to express the values, you need to have a group that makes the expression happen. And these are family councils, and these are family assemblies, and these are family education programs and foundations. And they make, without organization, values don't happen. They're just intentions.
Right. So I think there's one more point before I pass on to Peter. I think you make the point that family relationships, there are personal relationships in extended families across wherever they are. And there's a family network, and that seems to be a fairly regenerative process for familyness, if I may use the term. Yeah, Peter, yeah.
I just picking up the previous point, Dennis. When you talked around this whole generative idea, you talked about adding value, and there are, as you say, two kinds of value. There's creating a great family, which clearly, by judging by what you're saying, it just doesn't happen by accident. You don't just suddenly wake up one day and say, let's create a great family, without doing all these meetings and making a huge investment in the next generation and the activities. But what about the generative side in terms of business? A lot of G1 entrepreneurs and maybe G2 entrepreneurs, sort of who grew up in a G1 entrepreneurial business, want their next generation to be entrepreneurs. But we all know that not everybody is suited to be an entrepreneur. So in your travels and in your interviews with people, did you come across families which have got into the fourth and fifth generation where there was there wasn't the appetite to become entrepreneurs? And if so, how do the businesses and the families sustain if there isn't that same entrepreneurial flair that the G1 and the G2 had to create it in the first place?
Well, there's a couple of things that make it happen. First of all, the next generation has to be invited in, and otherwise the challenge is they have entrepreneurial, creative people, and they look at the family businesses. They say that was then, that's the past. What we're looking ahead, we want to create our own thing, and so they go off on their own. And one of the challenges is the family may be thinking about who should be the successor and who's going to come in the business, but they end up with the people that don't have any alternatives coming in, rather than the people that really should be there. Now, the other thing I want to say is that these are not a business; these are business families, and half of the families in my study from all over the world have sold their legacy business. Some of them invest in other businesses. Some of them, for example, say, well, we are a business family. We're going to find other family businesses. One family in the study has 200 businesses that they own, and so there many businesses. And the other process that you can all observe everywhere in the world is that by the third generation, the family members are not really growing up to be operators. Some of them want to work in the business. If it's a wonderful business, they go in, they become executives, and they aim for leadership. But mostly the family has moved into governance and stewardship rather than operators, being operators. Now, the other thing that these families are doing is building the talent that they have. It's not a zero-sum game. You're an entrepreneur. You're not an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur. No, that's not the way it is. The way it is people have some talent. Some people are naturally drawn to it. Some people really smart and they can learn it. Some people are, can be developed by good education. And so the family invites people to share ideas, invites them to, for example, they have a family bank where the family will invest in ideas and social ideas sometimes and business ideas. They encourage people to work for other companies and develop their skills. So they build it. It isn't so they build entrepreneurial talent as it exists, and mostly the families have when you have 40 young family members, you're going to have some talented people, and you're going to have some creative people, and you're going to have some people that have different interests. And the challenge for the family is to align and encourage these people to bring their ideas to the family, not to go out and kind of be all over the place.
I guess you got some safety in numbers if you've got 40, because if you've got 40 in the gene pool, it must mean that there's going to be one or two who are going to have entrepreneurial flair and talent. But in your book, you talk about the businesses beyond G4, where generally the family are involved in management. And I'm not sure what that really looks like. Are you saying that very often that the family are the CEO, or are they just involved in management supervision rather than having the responsibility of the entity or one of the enterprises involved in the system?
Well, what happens is that the family sometimes says, no next generation people can work in the business, and then the next generation says, well, what if, I really love this business. Why should everybody in the world be able to work in the business and not me? So they begin to say, well, family members can work in the business, but they all say you're not guaranteed an executive leadership role. So some people like the challenge. They're naturally drawn to it, and they move in, and but they don't expect by the third or fourth generation that just because I'm a so-and-so means that I'm going to be the next leader. They know that they're competing and that the family has a non-family leader probably, and the next leader will be chosen, and they may be a candidate, but the chances of success are really based on what they do, not on who they are.
But is that a great place for them to be?
And if they want to be there, it is. I mean, I see some, third, fourth generation, when the family does something that's wonderful. They have a ranch. They have a wonderful business that people respect. They do things, and the people are drawn to it. It's an invitation, is the way I put it. The family has to invite them to participate, but not just if they want to. If they want to participate, they also have to be prepared and ready. And every business, I think of businesses, like we all read the New York Times. That's got the fifth generation family. Now, they didn't need to have the fifth generation family be in the business, but the people in that family love journalism. And so not just one in this new generation, but they actually have a team of 3 family members. And why are they in it? Not because they're family, but because the family loves words and loves writing. And this is the place to do writing. And they all served their apprenticeships, and they all had lots of challenges, business challenges. And the family decided that family members could do what's needed to do to build a new generation.
So, Dennis, I want to stay with this culture and familyness thing. And I'm going to pick up two threads, not directly related. One, you make a passing mention in your book of the matriarch, the mother of the children, as you call it. So, what role do matriarchs, mother of children, play in creating generative families? This is one thread, and I'm going to weave another one in. You also mentioned that for perpetuity, if I may use the term, family members need to give up freedom to gain freedom. Can you focus on these two threads, unrelated as they may seem? Yeah.
Two quick things. One is, so we interviewed a family leader from the older generation and the younger generation. And all of the original family leaders, 3 of the 100 were started by women. But so what happened is inadvertently, this ended up with a largely male sample. No, we interviewed a number of women, but we didn't really focus on the matriarch role. So what we're doing now is I am part of working with a group that is actually doing a study of that. We're seeking matriarchs who were not formally expecting to be in a leadership position, who have ascended to that through inheritance or through widowhood, and looking at them. So we're about halfway through that study, and that's going to be coming out hopefully early in 2021. But we're finding that matriarchs have something in common with the children, and this is the second part of your your question, in the sense that they don't have formal power. So the older generation has the formal power, and the letting go and the adding freedom is in a paternalistic model, which a lot of India kind of lives in. There's a leader, and the leader is kind of it's what we call a steep hierarchy. The leader is here, and the rest of the people are down here. And the matriarch is kind of invisible, but she may be up here. But part of the deal is she's up here, but nobody mentions it. And the next generation. So the challenge is how does the older generation begin to let go? And what we find is that the younger generation that are down here, if they're all down here as individuals, they don't have much influence. But what happens when all the people down here, let's say the third generation, get together and they say, we've got an idea, we got a proposal for dad or sometimes granddad, and this is what we want to do. We want to create a council, or we want to create this or create that. And they come together collectively. All of a sudden, the collective voices have a little bit more informal authority. They don't have formal power, but because they're going to eventually have power, because they care about each other and they know each other really well, they can make their case. So the idea is that the informal power of a family enterprise can be formidable and can really make a difference, and to the formal power. And they don't have to listen, but they care, and they're human, and so they do listen. And part of the listening, when you start listening and start taking it seriously, that's what we mean by letting go. You're letting go of, I don't want to hear, I'm the boss, shut up. No, it's different.
And it mustn't be misconstrued, though, if the next generation get together and confront the elders, because that sounds like a coup.
It looks like a coup, and in some of these families, it was a coup. But sometimes it's gentler. The coups take place, but there's sometimes there's a gentler coup. These families talked about what is the challenge when they begin to say, Grandpa has run this business for 50 years and he's done wonderful things, but we would like him to step aside. So they create an elder role, or they create an emeritus role, or they say, can you run a seminar for the grandchildren and mentor them? It's gentler, but it sometimes there has to be a process for removing people and making the letting go happen more quickly. Sometimes it's a both and. For example, the next generation says, fine, you run the legacy business. We want to create a fund, or we want to invest in this. And the next generation creates their new thing, and it starts here. And then and the next generation thing becomes a big deal. And then all of a sudden they have formal power too, because they're producing something. And so it's more here than here.
But the elders, it needs to be their idea, because being told that they've got to go or step aside isn't something that does. It's not that popular. It's not that popular a discussion.
Well, it's not a one-time discussion. It's something that takes place over years and stages, and it's a kind of they're going down and the next generation is going up, and it's steps.
Okay. Well, you talked earlier about, we mentioned before about paternalism in India particularly, and in your book you talk about the journey from paternalism to partnership. And clearly a succession process is unlikely to be successful if the people who started the enterprise don't operate on the basis of the movement between paternalism to partnership. So how does that work in practice? What have you seen paternalistic people do, or what stories have you heard from the studies that you've done around this question of how a paternalistic founder has moved to a partnership model to bring in the rest of the other generations?
Well, actually, that happens sometimes, and there are some, but more commonly, the founder doesn't live forever and doesn't wants to work forever, but doesn't stay there forever. So somehow the second generation sometimes begins to operate differently when they gain control or they begin to move into the board. Sometimes they have an alliance with the advisors and they begin to move forward. But more often than not, the third generation and the second generation, because the second generation leader never has the authority of the first generation leader. Even if they have running the business, they're not running the family. So often it's nature, takes care of it, and people may be frustrated, but deep down they know that time is on their side, and sometimes the third generation is not burdened by the first generation leader. It's burdened by some of the legacy structures in the second generation that are not working, that are creating tension. And sometimes the family, as we know, the family can split. And so you have three brothers or three siblings in the second generation, and they don't get along. So they say, hey, we have a gigantic business. Let's make three large businesses out of it and go on our own way. Other times, the third generation creates there's a second generation non-family leader, and the third generation builds a new leadership structure and puts it in. So there's a whole lot of options, but time is a key variable, and time is on the side of the revolutionaries.
Do you see the third generation changing things when it comes to their turn? Do you see that over the study, looking at the businesses, the third generation has made significant changes to how things were?
Yeah, well, the third generation didn't grow up in the household with the founder, and so sometimes the third generation remembers the founder, let's say, differently than their parents. That he's nice grandpa who brings presents, who talks to them, and they really don't understand the stories of their parents about how dominating this person was, and so they have a different relationship, and they can get away with more things, particularly if the things are great ideas and great advancements for the family.
Peter, I know we are stretched for time, but I do need to ask one quick question, and then businesses in the West are older businesses, old money, if you like, as a metaphor. Businesses in India, particularly, if I may, as an example, and perhaps in other Eastern cultures, are not that old. They're still emerging. So, can you just say something about, you talk about small and medium enterprises, and you talk of them as hidden champions. They work under the radar. They're emerging businesses that have potential to become 100-year-old businesses and all that. Just a quick.
Yeah, well, Simon, who wrote, about, hidden champions, about kind of German businesses, points out that the infrastructure of many countries is not the giant corporations, but the small, medium-sized family businesses who do one thing, they do it well, they have a niche, they can defend that niche, the technology doesn't destroy it, and so they're successful over many, many generations. And that's the story of many family businesses. And I think that these businesses, these families, because they've been successful, have strong family organizations as well as business organizations. And they, for example, they're often in a small town, and they have influence in the town. They have political and social influence. The family is visible, and then they want to do the right thing. The family creates a foundation in the community, scholarships. They create hospitals and entities. They do many wonderful things. So there's really it's a little bit feudal, but these small businesses in small towns that are successful, they're really communities. They're not dictatorships and just businesses. They're social entities by the third generation.
Hidden champions, great word, great metaphor.
Great book. Peter, you're
on mute, Peter.
Yeah, sorry. We've got quite a lot of questions in, and I think they're all pretty relevant. And there's a good one here for you, Dennis. And somebody's asked, what's the single common critical leadership attribute you've seen in family leaders who've managed to get transition from G1 to G4?
Respectful listening. No matter who you are and what your power is, you want to listen to your children, you want to listen to your grandchildren, and you want to engage them. That seems to be what these families do. They're able to listen to each other and talk about things. I think when you start with that, you start sharing information, you start sharing ideas, you start trying things out. Everything goes from listening and talking. It really that's really where it starts.
And is that evidenced by your studies when you've heard the stories from the elders from the next generations?
Yeah, that's what they talked about. I mean, that was the quality that again, you don't see this in the business. You look at a business and you don't see that this family meets 4 times a year and they have a council and they talk about sustainability, and they talk about all kinds of ideas, and they send their kids to schools. You don't see that. You see the product, but you don't see the work that's behind it. And that engagement is what I think is the hidden side that we don't see in these families. And I would add the word respectful. You can be engaged in a bitter, nasty, non-productive way, and everybody's fighting over things, and that happens. But these families, it's not that they don't have conflict, but they really spend a lot of time finding ways to manage it so that they do it productively. And sometimes they have a dissident family member, and what the family does is say, you don't like what we're doing, why don't we just buy you out, and why don't you go off and you start a business the way you want to do, because the majority, the rest of the family wants to get going with it. So it's like they have a exit policy, and that they can say if someone is really disagrees with them.
But that's extreme, clearly. Yeah. So one of the questions that's come through is about the book and the extent to which it was based on how much of it was based on India, and is it applicable to an Indian concept? And I'm sure you have a view.
So two things. One is that this is about the commonalities. And so my colleague Jim Grubman and I wrote a book called Cross Cultures that talks about the different global cultures and how they're interacting. And those are about the differences. But the half of the 60% of the families are U.S. families. And as we continue to interview, we're getting more and more global families. There was about a half a dozen Indian families, and we had Bangladesh and Middle Eastern number families, Pakistan. I mean, the non-U.S. Was not Europe. It was every part of the world, and we didn't have enough to be able to differentiate the different cultures and say, well, Indian family businesses are this, and European, Swedish family businesses are this. But because we focused on what they had in common, and it was actually quite it's quite surprising that 100 businesses all over the world that are so different had even some clear commonalities. So that's kind of startling, just that we could write a book about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody's asked, picking up your point about if they don't agree, they can sell, or they can do something, start another business. Somebody's asked the question: is it wise for G3 to liquefy the assets and separate and start a new business? In that way, they become G1 again, and they can sort of do their own thing.
Sometimes it is. I mean, what happens is that even if you have one business, profit begins to come out of it. And so you accumulate wealth and you diversify. So even if you have a legacy business, by the second generation, you may have a family office or investments or other things that you do that are equally profitable. So is it wise? Sometimes I've seen, 3 siblings, and they're each have their own direction. One is a risk oriented, one is safety oriented, one wants to create a great foundation, and they say, hey, let's be brothers and siblings, but we don't need to be partners. And so and then in third, fourth generation, you have these families that are so successful, but they don't want to have 1,000 shareholders, so they do split. And I don't regard splitting and going in your own direction as a failure. I regard it as a decision that can be made thoughtfully or impulsively. And if you make it thoughtfully, that's a great decision. Great.
Hopefully they have a family alliance, nevertheless.
Exactly. And the family can decide we don't want to be a family. We don't want to be partners for the rest of our lives. That would be imprisonment. We want to be free.
Obviously, there are quite a number of questions about the current situation with COVID and the extent to which family businesses are using their resilience to either refocus, repurpose, pivot, and all of the above. What's your feeling about family businesses in the new world, having been through a pandemic? Do you think they're in a better position than before? And do you think that the familyness is more of a competitive advantage? There's a number of questions, and I've just picked up the themes.
So we're in the middle of a storm, and it's hard to kind of draw conclusions. But I've been writing. I just have an article that'll be coming out in Trusts and Estates next month. That's about this. And what I find is that, first of all, every family has to rethink its model, so that there's a family reset. Every family there's anxiety, and every family has to deal with anxiety. And the two things that a family shouldn't do is to deny it and say, oh, everything will work out and therefore we'll do nothing, or act impulsively and have one person just go out and do things that are today's good idea, but not next week's good idea. So what the families are doing is they're getting together, they're sharing information, they're not acting, they're not denying it, and they're beginning to rethink. And the qualities, and this is what I found, the qualities that I wrote about in the book, these families had lots of experience with diversity. They've been through world wars. They've been through nationalization. They've been kicked out of countries and had to go over and take very little of their resources. They've had all kinds of adversity. They've had business disasters. Resiliency and generativity are actually ways of adapting to continual change. So now we have continual change, to the max, 3-4 different, crises happening, intersecting, never happened before. The qualities of engagement, the qualities of thoughtful action, the qualities of listening to people, even if they don't have formal authority, the trying different experiments and not putting everything in one direction. All of those things are currency for surviving right now that really help a family.
Yeah. We've got one interesting question here, and as you're from the States, I think it's definitely directed at you, Dennis. Somebody said that in the States, Bill Gates and Buffett narrative is to give only a limited amount of money to children and transfer everything else to a foundation. Do you think that approach is applicable to all sizes of business, and what do you think of that approach?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what's happening. But I know these families. It isn't that they share something in common with the other families in the study, which is they have a modest lifestyle. These families, and all of the 100 families, are not living huge. They have nice houses. They have nice vacations. They have wonderful education, healthcare, but they're not. In value terms, extravagant. And all of the families are doing what Gates and Buffett are doing, which is creating, if they're hugely wealthy, they create huge foundations, but that doesn't neglect the comfort and the education and development of their next generation. So the Buffett family and the Gates family, what are their children doing? Buffett's children are all adults, and if you notice recently, he gave billions of dollars to foundation, but he gave it to foundations in the name that are controlled by each of his kids. So obviously they have jobs. Gates has Bill Gates has a daughter at Stanford, and she recently was had an interview with her mother that was broadcast, and they talked about that their future is about philanthropy, and it's not that the daughter's facing poverty. She's going to be comfortable, but her concern is what to do with her life. And the model that she has is to be a philanthropist because that's the opportunity that she has. And, why not take that? So I think Gates and Buffett are modeling something that's much more extensive and deeper than that. And it is the model of the generative family.
Okay, I think that's a great answer, and I agree with you. Somebody's asked about your research, and did you see any transition of culture from control to collaboration or innovation as there was a generational transition? Did you see that?
Well, this is the cross culture book that Jim Grubman and I wrote, and we saw that there are three basic global cultural styles: the individualistic style of the West and the Anglo-Saxon world, and the harmony, respect for elders culture of Southeast Asia and China, and what we call the honor culture, which is the very hierarchical, and it's unlike the Eastern culture because there's less trust in the community and more, it's like my way. We better gather together and take, and that is a very paternalistic culture in one way, and the Eastern culture is very paternalistic, and the Western culture is individualistic. But what's happening is, and again, this is before COVID, so everybody was traveling around the world. These people were meeting each other. They were going to schools. They were meeting in universities and prep schools. They were working in similar institutions, global institutions. And so what was, and they more or less, they were marrying and living in different countries. So you could be a family from India, but your main business might be in Silicon Valley and in Africa and all over the world. So these were global. And so what Jim and I are seeing is what we call the fourth culture, which is a blending of culture. And it takes some of the things about individualism where everybody has a voice and everybody feels like I should be equal and you shouldn't be the boss. We all, and the kind of Asian and Western cultures that say that you have to respect elders and the family comes first, and being an individual isn't who you are part of your family. And India and the honor cultures are a little bit a lot of hierarchy, very steep hierarchy, lower trust, and much more kind of used to social instability than the Eastern culture. So we wrote Cross Cultures, and it's about the clash and the dynamics of these cultural styles. And in a way, that's about the differences, and Borrowed from Your Grandchildren is about the similarities.
Yeah. And on that theme of culture, somebody's asked the question, and this is also one I'd like to hear what PM has to say. The question is, in India, the family business community is less than 7 to 8% who've gone beyond the third generation. And the question is that due to cultural impact or change of business dynamics? So do you think it's a cultural reason that such a small percentage have gone to the third generation, or is it business dynamics?
May I, Dennis? Yeah. My own view of it is that Indian family businesses are culturally, they're not as composed and coherent in their culture. So that's one piece. And therefore, and also, it's the business dynamics and the opportunities to grow, moving from the license Raj to a market-oriented, the liberalization, all of these have contributed to business galloping. And sometimes business gallops and leaves the culture behind. Mm-hmm. That's what I see happening more often in the Indian family business context.
Dennis, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the evolution of business. So in India, there's some events that I've learned about, so that you have the unified, family culture. You had protected businesses up until a dozen or so years ago, so that the businesses were protected and global partners didn't come in. And now the businesses have to be more global. And there are all kinds of challenges that come up, so that the culture of the family has to be looking outward, not inward, and begin to face problems that I think up until a generation ago, Indian culture was more inward and really focused on the family and didn't have to, deal with external influences as much. So that's one of the things I've seen in Indian culture.
I think the danger with generalizing around the Indian culture and family business piece is that you tend to hear only about the very big ones, because they're the ones that have the influence. But there must be millions and millions and millions of small businesses that have transitioned from one generation to the next, and there's probably instead of 7 or 8% as the person questioned of who got through to the third generation, there must be millions by number who are in the third, fourth generation, because they've been there for many, many decades, and there's no research into that. And so I think it's important to recognize that the culture of holding a family together in India is really important, and it's probably more important than other places in the world. I'd
agree with you, Peter. I'll agree with you that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we are getting to the point where we're coming to the end of the time allowance. I'm just seeing if there's any one final question. Unfortunately, we've got hundreds of questions, so it's actually quite difficult to do this. Okay, there's one question here is about the role of professionals, and it often comes up in these kind of discussions, and in particular in relation to some of the older businesses that you've seen, Dennis. How successful is it? How successful have people been in bringing in professionals to help the longevity of family businesses? Do you think that's a big factor?
They've all used professionals. They've had good experiences and bad experiences, and what they report is that the professionals that come in to do a technical thing and transaction are not as successful as those that are able to be educators and help them see that the things that you're thinking about as a family come from your family bubble. And look, there are all these other families, not just in India, but in other countries, and there's a lot that you have to learn. And these advisors that I think are most helpful are those that bring them into a larger community, that bring them to educational programs, that don't just say, I'm going to write you a family constitution, which is a silly thing to do, but to say, I'm going to work with you to design the kind of organization you want as a family. I'm going to help you meet other families. I'm going to help you connect up with groups like the Family Business Network, where you can be part of a community of families and really take on a long-term advisor role, not rushing to kind of do what they think they want, a kind of an immediate fix. And every family reports having wonderful advisors, some of whom are right here on this panel.
Well, thank you, Dennis. That's a great way to close. Thank you for the plug. What we've got to do now is I'd just like to
thank you. It's wonderful chatting with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, PM. I'd just like to make a couple of closing observations. I think your point about the generative family generating both increased wealth and a great family, I think has been a fantastic insight, and the book really covers that. The other thing that is very well covered that we didn't get much time to talk about is this whole question of the separation of the business from the family, and how what you've seen in your studies is that the businesses actually get more successful and have greater longevity when the family are less dependent on them, and there is separation of family wealth from business wealth. And in COVID, in these times where families have got all their eggs in one basket, and the basket is shrinking because of a massive external factor, the families that haven't separated their wealth, their personal wealth from the business wealth, have found themselves in some kind of a difficulty. And I never forget, at business school, there was a professor who had this wonderful adage. He said, what you have to do in a family business is render your cash cow dead before someone does it for you. And that's really what COVID is doing to a huge number of businesses. And I think there were some good lessons there. So without holding the screens open, I would just like to take this opportunity, PM and especially Dennis, for your contribution and for sharing your thoughts and for talking about your brilliant book. And of course, for you in San Francisco, it is at the absolute crack of dawn. So you've got your whole day ahead. Yep. And over in India, everyone's going to go out, presumably, and have a nice dinner if they're allowed out. And if they're not, yep, they're still going to have a nice dinner.
They're not allowed.
Because that's really important. So on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank the Parampara Institution and Mr. G.M. Rao, the chairman of GMR, for his tremendous support to enable this to happen. And there's another session next week, which the flyer for which will come up when the screen closes, which is about reputation And I'm hoping that we'll have lots of people watching that. This is recorded and this will be available from the website. And we look forward to welcoming other speakers and other attendees to the Parampara symposiums going forward. Thank you, everybody, and good night.